Hello, hi, welcome to Unitary Designation. Today I wanted to talk about some interesting video that I found. It's about Jordan Peterson joining the Daily Wire Plus platform. I'm going to do a slight reaction kind of video to his video, Why I Joined Daily Wire Plus. It was put up on the 13th of July, 2022. It has, at the point of this video, the 1st of August, gathered 650,000 views. That's roughly, I assume, average for his kind of videos. It's a very brief sort of trailer teaser for their partnership, but he also goes through a lot of interesting points about the legacy media, why he is forming up with an already existing platform, and sort of the implications that has. And I figured that this was interesting. Not so much because I necessarily agree with Peterson on everything, but because of him and Shapiro were both figures of what was called the intellectual dark web. They were sort of these countercultural, long-depth, in-depth sort of conversationalist figures that appeared as a response to the fall of the legacy media. This happened back in 2017, 2018, and earlier. Characters like Sam Harris, Brett and Eric Weinstein, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, and of course Mr. Shapiro. They were all sort of like, what they had in common was that they had long-form, in-depth political and philosophical videos, and that the legacy media became more and more clickbaity. And it's sort of like a move away from what has been termed legacy media, TV, 5-minute spots on talk shows, and into like long form conversations like podcast styles. So I think this is a new shift. Peterson has been independent since his semi-cancellation, semi-retirement from university professor. He's been more of like a political commentator on his YouTube channel. And, love him or hate him or be indifferent, it's not necessarily about him or his viewpoints. I happen to agree with certain aspects of some of his positions, and I happen to disagree with a lot of things about his positions. And I think that's important when you're an intellectual. Not that I necessarily boast myself as that, but an aspiring one, you might say. Is that you have to navigate the intellectual landscape, and people, titans of the intellectual landscapes, either fraudulent or legitimate titans. Either way, he's a large figure. They sometimes make good arguments for certain things, and then you have to navigate those territories. You have to be like, okay, I disagree with that position, but I agree with that value, or I disagree with that value, but I agree with that outcome, and sort of you have to navigate all these things. And so I thought that was interesting that they're starting a platform of themselves, for themselves, or rather Peterson is joining Ben Shapiro's. So especially in the context of the broader culture wars. So we're going to go through this video in a fair bit of detail, segments of it. Some segments are less relevant to what I want to talk about. So I'll play this in increments and talk about the implications. So here's the first minute.
I recently joined forces with the Daily Wire in a new venture they call Daily Wire Plus. The plan is to build a multimedia empire offering services on the philosophical, educational, journalistic, and entertainment front, including movies, TV shows, and media for children, and an empire that will not fall prey to the woke authoritarianism that has become increasingly mandatory in so many places.
So here he says straight outward that the goal is to create a media empire. So their ambitions are not necessarily to be content with web-based long-form context. Like Peterson had intellectual debates with Sam Harris in 2016 and 2017 and 2018 and onwards. And these were like long form intellectual debates about the nature of truth and values. Like, what is truth? It was an epistemological, ethical decision. This seems to be different in that they're going to attempt to create cultural content as well, like movies and TV shows. And I think part of those flashing images was also kids shows, which has been a contentious issue in the States. What kind of content should be aimed at kids? And this is part of the right pushback towards the current increment of the left. So yeah, it's a multifaceted empire. That's the aim. The word empire might be troubling. It might also be meant to like assuade fear for people who happen to be nervous, right? People who happen to not like it when the right talks about amassing empires. Either way, it might also be intentional. Like maybe they're both aiming at creating something that will rival legacy news media. Something less flashy than Fox News, something more substantial. In that way, it's rather dangerous in that it has some gravitas to it, or at least it's attempting to. And in the other sense, it might also be very hubris. Like it might be very easy to look back and laugh at that ambition. But we'll see. It's interesting use of language.
Including, let's say, the once great Disney. Why did I decide to do this? And what does Daily Wire Plus offer? First, I like working with Ben Shapiro and his crew. Shapiro and I have some great plans to undertake things together that we could not do easily apart. We're going to...
So here, Peterson addresses some of his upcoming intellectual projects. I'm not going to promote them because it's not my place and it's not relevant to this video's content. So Shapiro has been running the Daily Wire for some time out of California. They recently moved from California to Texas because of California's statesmanship, like the laws that made it hard to govern a business there. This is interesting because Peterson has largely been running independent intellectual work out of his YouTube channel ever since he came back from a health break. And his intellectual pursuits have been, I wouldn't say less in scale. He's been doing a book tour to promote a second book. He's been doing, some podcasts, essentially podcasts and interviews about sustainability and trying to combat what he perceives as globalism. Whether or not you agree with this undertaking, the fact is that his media platform his reach has been less than it was pre-hospitalization. So him joining up with a production team of this size frees him up to do more in-depth intellectual pursuits. Now, is that good or bad? Well, that depends on what side of the aisle you lay on. I happen to think that any well thought out, any well thought out opinion, even the ones you disagree with, is welcome to 140 characters on Twitter. Like, you suck is infinitely less valuable than a 40-minute YouTube video about here's a specific aspect of a specific issue. Like, you might actually do some intellectual progress this way. Now, what does it mean for one of the leading intellectuals in the world, at least recent history-wise, to get a whole production team under his wings? That's interesting, and people might be sleeping on this. We'll see what he does, but this could be potentially huge. So we're gonna move ahead in the video.
Second, I like the unabashedly shameless capitalist ethos of the Daily Wire crew. They made me a great deal financially, one that offers me essentially unlimited creative freedom and opportunity, and still means that I can use YouTube, as I have been, to offer free content to a worldwide audience. I've always...
So this part is interesting. Peterson began his rise to fame on YouTube when he published his videos in response to the Bill C-16 in Canada. And since then, he has continued. He started posting his lectures as early as 2013, including one of his earlier TED Talks. And the fact that all his lectures were up when he hit stardom meant that there was no easy way to mischaracterize him, because he had spoken avidly against right-wing totalitarianism, left-wing totalitarianism. He became a hard figure to instantly demonize, which saved him in large part. So he's been using YouTube for a while, and YouTube hasn't banned him even at the height of his controversy. And he's still up there. He's still been using YouTube to the best of his abilities. So he's still going to keep using that platform. And for the people who found him mainly through his intellectual work, like maybe the conversations with Sam Harris was their gateway, or maybe they came for the C-16 controversy, or maybe the interviews that he did where he was trying to be mischaracterized by Kathy Newman, for example. Whatever drove you, his YouTube channel served as essentially a platform. And that's interesting because the world's leading intellectual at the time, and I use intellectual to mean someone who traffics in ideas, not someone who is smart or valid. The world's leading idea worker was platformed on YouTube, and he's still going to keep that in part, which is interesting because it roots him in a kind of part of his critique of the legacy media. And he did a lot of critiquing of the legacy media on the Joe Rogan podcast, was that he said that YouTube loads production quality, high production quality, and that part of what makes the legacy media so untrustworthy today is their high production quality. There's producers, there's cameras, there's vignettes, there's desks, there's dress, there's lighting, there's makeup, there's everything is so I wouldn't say false, but fabricated. And part of the counter move away from the legacy media news channels is platforms social media platforms in general, Reddit, YouTube, Twitter, even TikTok, Snapchat, any kind of Instagram, any kind of information sharing platform, Spotify, right? Podcasts, they've all largely replaced legacy media. And by legacy media, I mean stuff like TV news anchors, 24-hour news cycle, old text-based journalism, right? All these traditional forms of media are dying. And if Marshall McLuhan or any media critic of that sophistication were alive today, that would be a long video in itself. And I'm not a media scholar, although I am media literate. I happen to think that this shift from his YouTube platform exclusively to a more production-oriented backed staff in addition is an interesting change. And it's interesting because it represents the right wing mobilizing. Now, you can debate whether or not Peterson is more a classical centrist or a classical liberal or some kind of faux socialist. You can debate. He's been critiqued by all positions. The extreme left call him a Nazi, the extreme right call him a Jewish shill, and the centrists debate him on the merits of each and every argument. So, hate him or love him, the point is that Ben Shapiro is definitely well-placed center-right. And being backed by Ben Shapiro's center-right organization, pushing right-wing narratives, puts Peterson in a more right-wing camp. So this is a shift for his intellectual position, and it's a shift for the media, because now you have sort of the darling of countercultural media narratives. Peterson is an established media presence, both in traditional media, especially in Canada, and in counter media in the IDW, intellectual dark web vein. So this is interesting for that regard. We're going to move ahead.
I have been working in isolation for a long time, essentially since departing from the university. I've had a very good team of people around me, but we can only do so much while concentrating on producing high-quality educational and journalistic content. And having a professional crew of several hundred people available to handle logistics, filming, production, travel, editing, distribution, marketing, and merchandising is a non-trivial advantage.
A non-trivial advantage, right? So this isn't, I mean, it sort of goes without saying, but it's also not trivial, right? That's a lot of work. The quality of the videos that has been put out since falling under the Daily Wire Plus umbrella is different. It's different, and it puts itself out there as a voice of reason-esque kind of production team, which is dangerous. Because it would be easier to dismiss a sort of low resolution, characterized right-wing thing, right? If Peterson joined a Tucker Carlson-esque kind of segment, it would be less interesting, or less, it would have less reach. But it seems like the aim of the platform is to move the needle of reason, like reasonable discourse has moved. I'm not saying it has, but the aim of this platform and the way it presents itself seems to be that the needle of reason has moved center right, because that's where the reasonable position is now. And that's more dangerous than a Tucker Carlson rant show. So keep an eye open on this, whether you're on the right or the left. Peterson is being mobilized. Not weaponized, but mobilized. He's being produced now by not just his own team. And his own team led him through the rise and slight decline that was the 2017, 2018, 2019 period. Like he was the leading intellectual in the world, and that was his own team. And now he has a vastly, like double, triple the size team behind him producing his videos. So this is non-trivial. Gonna skip ahead again.
Thrilled with the outcome and ready to go forward. No holds barred. To subscribe, go to dailywireplus.com. You will have immediate access to the new projects that we have posted, including a new mini-series, Dragons, Monsters, and Men, that I recorded as the kickoff for the DW Plus project. Daily Wire Plus has 890,000 subscribers. Netflix has 200 million. DW Plus is not woke. Is Netflix? Decide that for yourself, but give some consideration to supporting this new joint venture and help us continue educating and informing and battling on the side of tradition in the raging culture war. Go if you would.
Right. So the music, the dramatic music, the well-articulated, punctuated speech adds to the drama of it. There's a certain drama flair to it all. Like, I'm brave and I'm standing up for tradition. He addresses a culture war. This will help. This will help him be a well-produced voice in the culture war. Daily Wire Plus is not woke. It's Netflix. So there's shots fired to other platforms. Platforms like Netflix, Spotify, Reddit have all been sort of content hosting platforms. And Netflix has gone downhill lately. I don't know why. It's another video in itself. It's a separate issue. You know, the old adage, go woke, get broke, doesn't sort of apply because Netflix has been, how would you say, aligned with progressive ideals for quite some time. So it seems to be a greed issue in the Netflix case. Like, they've cut down on video quality, they've cut down on the ability to share your content with friends. Like you can't use the same account multiple places. So yeah, watch this space, right? A vacuum is forming because legacy media is not going to replace their own. Like legacy media collapsed, and something rushes in to fill that vacuum. And it's been Spotify, it's been Netflix, it's very much been YouTube, right? And we're all everyone on YouTube is either riding that wave or trying to catch that wave or watching that wave, right? YouTube is essentially the greatest information sharing platform that's ever been, right? It rivals TV in scope and range and depth that you couldn't have that level of choice on cable networks. It just wouldn't work. Secondly, the right has stopped trying to compete for the attention of these. It's hard to call Netflix a traditional network, but the right wing has stopped competing for the cultural attention of those platforms, like Spotify, Netflix, Disney Plus, etc. Peterson even mentions Disney, and they've started making their own. And Ben Shapiro, well funded on his own in Daily Wire, joining up with the cancelled actress from the Disney Plus show, from The Mandalorian. I can't recall her name, but they've been trying to create right-wing movies and series, and now they're going to team up with Peterson to create right-wing intellectual debates, well-produced ones too. Will we see Peterson rise back to his 2018 fame? The Overton window might have shifted a bit, and the novelty might wear off. And he's also older, and more scarred by the world. Well, I don't think so, because the legacy media, or at least the new media, knows how to handle him now. Like, part of his initial rise to fame was that he could withstand the initial low resolution brush off attacks, and that sort of propelled him in the right and alt-right space. But since then, it's the novelty has sort of worn off, and he's become more like a in-depth, case-by-case, issues-by-issues commentator. Like he spent his time on YouTube recently addressing the shortcomings of the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, or the truckers' unions, or the Dutch farmers, or Chinese overreach, or specific issues about energy consumption, or agricultural production, or the climate change, or, like he's become way more like what he always wanted to be, I assume, which is an in-depth commentator on specific issues. So I don't think this will propel him back to his 2018 stardom, but I also don't think this is nothing. I think this is an interesting thing to watch, no matter where you fall on liking or hating Peterson. Yeah. It's a subscription-based platform, and this might recatalyze him, and it also might be just, the big thing that Netflix and Spotify has going for them is that everyone uses it, right? Whether you're on the right or the left, you still watch your shows on these platforms. Netflix never branded themselves as a left-wing platform, although their shows obviously lean that direction, which is good. I think it's the role of the arts and the medias to lean left and produce provocative and progressive analysis of our culture. I think that's what art always has done. I've never seen right-wing TV show art before. Like, there used to be shows on the Fox network, right? Like Family Guy and Simpsons. They weren't necessarily right-wing. Like, House used to be on Fox, and House was not right-leaning at all. So I haven't seen right-wing content before. I don't think anyone has, outside of like fringe local cable channels in the States. So, like, if they produce a big movie, will they do marketing? will you hear about it? The same way you hear about the new Netflix movie Gray Man with Ryan Gosling and Captain America, Chris Evans. Like, how will the marketing work? Will they just pander to their own audience? Peterson mentioned they have something like 800,000 subscribers versus Netflix 20 million or 200 million. Either way, it's a category difference. So this might be a drop in the bucket, might be a big nothing, and it might also be like a big melding together. I don't know if it's the same hunger for long form, in-depth intellectual discussion that there is for Netflix type content. So Peterson's in this video says he's all in, and that this is like, he's committed. He's not, toe half dipped. He's fully on board with this approach, which means he agrees with the values and the approaches. So yeah. Closing thoughts. Peterson is joining a right-wing platform. Ben Shapiro and Peterson are joining up. Other IDW figures might join him. You might see other countercultural current podcasters join up with this platform, depending on if it grows. And it's not the only cultural medium that has tried to emulate left-wing platforms, right? Like, I think Trump made his own social media platform similar to Twitter. It's worrisome because it shows that the culture war has, how would you say it? It has polarized people to the degree that they're no longer fighting over attention on platforms. They're just creating their own platforms. And, we all know that echo chambers are bad, and we all realize that that's what certain talking spaces has become. In a way, I guess it's good because it's a market-oriented approach. It's not like these arguments are no longer on the dark web or like hidden from like public consumption in a basement somewhere. These in-depth, they're out in the open. These things are talked about out in the open. So if you don't like it, it's he said it publicly, right? But it's ideally you would like to see one platform that hosted content for both sides, right? At least that's how it should be in a democracy. You don't want to marginalize a group into making their own platform. Like, at least, yeah, the fact that he refers to it as a culture war, just as if, not just as if that was established fact, but also that this is an sort of like a gearing up of it. It's like, I don't know if that's a good approach to take, right? Because if you're trying to de-escalate tension, to feed into the narrative of there's a war, we're fighting it, we're escalating, we've been pushed to this platform, we're justified in seeking our own platform. These are all kind of like, these are all complicated things to say, and then we all knew that there would be a backlash to a progressive wave. Is this a better backlash than storming the Capitol? Is it in the same vein? Is it a category degree different? These are interesting questions, and where you end up on the political spectrum, I don't see it as a good thing that decides what platform you use. Because even if you disagree with the left wing culturally, maybe you agree with them economically. And so you can still watch Netflix and be like, okay, I don't think that part isn't okay, but I agree with this feeling of everyone coming together, everything is one. Or maybe you disagree with that. Maybe you think what's mine is mine, but I can, goddammit, but I can still watch the new Star Wars movie, or the new Disney Plus show, or the new Marvel movie. And I can still get with the culture at large in that way. But this is a giving up of trying to find unifying narratives. And this has become a battle of narratives. And part of what made Peterson such a lightning rod of the culture war initially was that he was trying to push some form of center vision. A center vision for males primarily, or well, for everyone. Fix your life together, take personal responsibility, don't blame the world for your mistakes, etc. That's not necessarily pro-male, it just happened to be males listening, right? YouTube skews 80% male, and most of his videos are on YouTube, but irregardless, the point is that a person who first stood forward and was demonized as a Nazi and then said, I'm a centrist, I'm a radical centrist, I want people to come together, now stepping into a right-wing platform. I'm not going to criticize Peterson because he knows more about on this choice, because he knows more about the potential reach and potential impact his intellectual pursuits can have. Like, he's more informed on the risks and the advantages. But I am going to critique, I'm going to be suspicious of the implications of this choice. Like, I hope he's thought this true. Coincidentally, he's also kicked from Twitter. I also don't think that's good. Freedom of speech. At least on Twitter, he could interact with his dissenters and come to some form of analysis. And given that Peterson isn't just ignorable, you can't just plug your ears and pretend he doesn't exist, because he still reaches his audience. You have to ask yourself, do you want this or do you want some other alternative? Because it's a tricky question. Ben Shapiro also isn't to leave out of this analysis. Peterson is pro-Christianity, not fundamentalist Christianity, but a more philosophical, theological, sophisticated analysis of Jungian narratives and like classical heroes' journeys in Christianity. And Shapiro is not on that side. He's a Jew. He's a very well articulated, educated, conservative person of the Jewish faith. And does that cause conflict, or will it, or does it impact the reception that the right will have to the Daily Wire? I mean, these are intellectual traditions that have traditionally been in conflict. So it's like, how will they cohabitate? And is it good that everything that is not in the top 20% of leftist wing, everyone but the 20% of the leftist, the 20% most leftist side of the left wing is banding together despite their disagreements to, like, combat them on their own platforms? Is that good? Is that bad? Is it freedom of speech? Is it echo chambers? Is it so no answers here. Don't sleep on this would be my takeaway. Okay. I'm sure I'll think of more to say afterwards, but I just figured I'd give my 2 thoughts on my 2 cents on this, because it's not trivial, right? Don't sleep on this. And 2, it's a further move away from legacy media to established countercultural platforms. And if you thought that Netflix moving the Overton window from cable to streaming was a big shift, right? Mark McLuhan said the media missed the message. Then seeing the right wing, and then maybe even the radical right wing, make their own platform, like far right of the Daily Wire, not necessarily a good trend. Ideally, we'd all have one channel that represented everyone, or at least a set of channels that had programs for everyone, so that you could think and reflect, and it's a whole thing. So, just figured I'd comment on the biggest intellectual in the world getting a production team increase 4 times the size. Thanks for watching. This has been Unitary Designation. I hope to see you next video. Peace out.